Sherlock, a young high-ranking demon, aims to become the greatest demon lord in his world. For that, he will need to own a dungeon and build it into a great place. And today is the day he finally owns a dungeon. Dungeons are mysterious places, full of wonderful and often horrifying things. But only the demons who own dungeons are given the title of Demon Lord and command the respect of other demons. The dungeon owners could earn a lot of money from the dungeon and also gather up their own forces. Sherlock was not always a high-ranking demon. He was born and raised in the slums. That is what drives him to become a demon lord and grow in glory and wealth. He worked hard for hundreds of years, and with the money he saved, he bought a dungeon for himself. He declares to the empty dungeon that this was the beginning of his story and he would surpass all other demon lords soon. But his dream of building the top dungeon is still too far away from him. As Sherlock activates the core of the dungeon using his magic and personal seal, he laughs as he tells the reason for buying this dungeon. He did not buy the ragtag dungeon because he was charmed by the succubus saleswoman, or because the surface world was close to him, or because he liked challenges. It was the only dungeon he could afford, and he was now the owner of the cheapest dungeon in the underworld. But nothing good is going to come from complaining about the dungeon, and Sherlock starts working. The dungeon core activates and Sherlock is excited to start working. But he is shocked when he sees a face in the core that talks to him. It tells that it was called Blue and calls Sherlock master. There was nothing like this mentioned in the manual, and Sherlock reads it quickly to see what could be done about this situation. He thinks that the saleswoman gave him a fake core or a defective one. His doubts are even more aggravated when the dungeon core starts saying words he had never heard before, like time travel or aborigines. Sherlock decides to go and return the cheap core and work hard to buy another one. But the core pleads to get him to stay. He tells his new master that he picked up those words from another world, and there was nothing wrong with him. But Sherlock is not listening to him, and the dungeon core explodes, leaving only the floating face that requests him to stop. He asks Sherlock to not return him and calls him the future great demon lord. Those words stop Sherlock right in his tracks, and he is impressed by the core. Not only could it think and talk, but it was also wise enough to see that he was going to become a great demon lord in the future. Sherlock is tempted by the flattery of Blue and decides to give him a chance. He tells the core of his ambition and what would the dungeon have once it became the top dungeon in the underworld. Blue is happy to oblige and says that he would help Sherlock in achieving his dream. But the first thing to do now is to summon monsters. Different dungeons could spawn different types of monsters according to their level, but since Sherlock's dungeon was at the lowest level, it could only summon goblins. He decides to go on with summoning right away, but Blue stops him and suggests a better idea instead. He says that the demon lord would have to pay goblins for their hard work, but he knew about the goblins from another world that would work for free, and even give him money too. Sherlock is shocked and asks Blue what he meant. Blue tells him that it was called an in-game purchase in the other world. Sherlock doesn't understand half the words his dungeon core uses, but decides to give it a try. He asks Blue how could he summon the goblins from another world and form a contract with them. Blue tells him that he had to create a server first. That was the connecting link between the two worlds. For that, Sherlock had to pour magic into him for 1 week at a steady rate so he could create a server from his memories. Sherlock works with Blue and finally builds a server. But before summoning the goblins, Blue tells Sherlock that the alien goblins would do some childish things like giving weird nicknames to themselves, fighting or trading among themselves, and the best way to manage them was through the official webpage. Sherlock is confused by another strange phrase, and Blue explains that it was like an embassy between the two worlds. Blue asks his master to create and manage the official website of the dungeon to recruit goblins. He presents a computer to Sherlock and has already done most of the basic work. Sherlock decides to give a catchy name to his dungeon and names it Dungeon Eternal Kingdom. In the human world, people see the advertisement for the first virtual reality online game, Dungeon Eternal Kingdom, and it was looking for first test players. The humans who see the ad are really excited and sign up for it. Sherlock is shocked on seeing their response and eagerness to join him. Blue tells him that there were about 800 million players or goblins in that world, and they had to select only 100 of them as the first test players. Sherlock selects 100 test players he sees potential in and tells them that they were qualified for the first round of tests. But before summoning them, Sherlock has some preparations to make. He withdraws the money from his bank account and goes to buy supplies for the goblins. But he has only 1,000 magic stones, and that is not enough to buy everything he needs. Even the cheapest iron pickaxes are much more expensive than he thought. But luckily, there is a cheaper offer for dungeon owners to establish a blacksmith shop in the dungeon itself. Sherlock likes the offer already, but Blue tells him that he could sell weapons made in the blacksmith shop to the goblins as well. He buys the shop, and with the remaining magic stones, he buys food for the goblins. But before summoning the goblins, Blue tells him that he must post novice missions. He explains to Sherlock that they were simple tasks to acquaint the goblins with this world, and he should reward them for completing them. Sherlock says that he will go bankrupt if he has to award goblins with magic stones, but Blue tells him that he can use coins as the goblins like gold and other precious metals. A blacksmith named Simba comes to Sherlock's dungeon to set up shop. He explains the terms of their contract and starts setting up his furnace. With that, it is time to summon the goblins. But nothing happens when Sherlock uses his summoning spell, and Blue tells him that the goblins were fine-tuning their appearance. The first one is named Kiruko Yumikawa, and he fearlessly explores the dungeon and interacts with the demon lord. Soon, the remaining goblins start popping up one after the other, and they are mesmerized by the dungeon. They were just humans who thought they were inside a game, but it was far too realistic. The goblins are quite chaotic and only get in order when Sherlock shows off his aura and asks them to pledge their loyalty to him and the dungeon. Then he asks the goblins to take up their missions and start working to build the dungeon. The goblins look at the tasks and rewards and start doing them. Sherlock thinks that with the mining in the dungeon, he would be able to procure armor and weapons to strengthen his hired goblins. That way, his dungeon would grow in strength and face stronger monsters. But the goblins start approaching him and asking for various things he does not understand. He is perplexed by their behavior and wonders how are they not afraid of dying. But despite their weird behavior, the alien goblins are efficient workers, and he rewards the goblins who complete their quests. Blue tells him that they needed to add more content to their dungeon for the entertainment of the goblins. It was a game to them, and the more content there was, the more motivated they would be to work. Sherlock worries that he doesn't have enough magic stones to provide them with entertainment, but Blue says that the goblins could fight monsters for that. They would be thrilled to do quests that involve killing monsters, and he should give them weapons and armor as a reward for that. Sherlock understands the gist of it and goes to check out the nest of spider monsters as the next addition to the dungeon game. There would be a large number of spider minions, and the Spider Queen would serve as the boss. He thinks that this challenge would be enough to satisfy his goblins, but Blue informs him that one goblin had died. Sherlock goes back and is concerned that the tasks he gave were too hard, but Blue tells him that the goblin died to test out the resurrection system of the game. His soul was trapped inside Blue, and he could return it after the body of the goblin was restored by the dungeon owner. Sherlock heals the body of the goblin, and Blue returns his soul. The goblin is revived, and now the other goblins also want to try it out. But Sherlock gets angry and scolds them and says that they should not die without the need for it. But once that has been done, Sherlock edits the official website and adds a new map and monsters to defeat. The Spider Queen is the main boss, and the site tells that the Demon Lord Sherlock will give his favor to anyone who brought her hair to him. He asks Blue why he had to give out such a reward, and Blue replies that the goblins liked it when their existence and efforts were acknowledged. Sherlock thinks that the goblins sounded like humans from the surface world, oblivious that they were humans from another world. But before that, he wants to see what the goblins said about him on the website, and is overjoyed on seeing that they liked his dungeon so much. The goblin Yumikawa has created a complete walkthrough of his first day in the game. He tells about everything with great excitement, from the game engine to the visuals to the NPCs. He says that at first, he thought it would be a sham, but the game was so good that he almost felt like a goblin. There were settings to control the pain sensitivity and death, and the game also felt too real. Even though reviving was possible, it could not be done without leaving your body intact. If you lost your body, you would have to respawn by entering the login room again. The blacksmith Simba was one of the 2 NPCs, and it was not smart to mess around with him. He owns the only shop in the building, and everything is bought and sold there. The reward was copper coins that were awarded by the second NPC, the Demon Lord Sherlock, the owner of the dungeon. The goblin also explains that nothing in the game seemed like a game. There was no health bar or profile page, and the growth was like the real world. The dungeon core was called Blue, and he also gave out tasks according to the needs of the dungeon. All the changes made to the dungeon were permanent, and things were not restored on logging out. The players could also not go against the Demon Lord Sherlock, who could command them to do anything. Sherlock watches the entire video, and is surprised that the goblins were so excited about working that they made an entire video about the dungeon. Their comments were also too weird, and Sherlock decides to do other things first. He goes to the dungeon and asks Simba to create weapons and armor for the goblins to clear the spider's nest. Simba is concerned that the Demon Lord was sending the goblins to their death, but Sherlock says that the goblins were rather excited about it. But Simba says that the goblins had collected enough ore to forge enough weapons for them. He He asks Sherlock that since he had hired 100 goblins so early, he would need more people setting up shop too. Sherlock refuses him but does not tell him that the goblins were working for free, and he had no money to afford any other employee. Simba is surprised when Sherlock tells him that he should make a price list to sell the weapons to goblins and not distribute them for free. The Demon Lord explains that it would be a good way to keep the coins circulating and maintain their value. Simba shows him the daggers and armor he has made, and Blue tells him to add panel explanations to these weapons. Sherlock is impressed and decides that it would make the game more interesting for the goblins. They could grow stronger and use better weapons with better stats. He decides to incorporate the reputation system for giving out his favor to the goblins with the weapon system, and there would be limitations of reputation to equip better gears. The goblins wake up the next morning and decide to check out Simba's shop, but they are shocked to find new content without an update or server maintenance. But Sherlock is ready to give them a new mission. They had to clear the spider's nest for the glory of their dungeon. But there is a twist that does not make the goblins happy. There were only 5 sets of armor and daggers made by Simba, and their price was kept at 600 copper coins. Sherlock had made the calculations and found out that none of the goblins could have earned more than 100 coins yesterday. They would now be motivated to work even harder and earn more coins, and Simba would also have time to make more sets. But he is shocked on seeing the goblins talking among themselves and buying the copper coins for their home currency. Sherlock is shocked that they were willing to spend real money to buy something that was practically worthless. Blue tells him that if they make a mechanism for players to spend money to buy items in the game, their dungeon could become rich very soon. But right now, 5 of the richest people have bought the weapons and are ready to fight the spiders. They go to the spider's nest, and their leader is a goblin named Arthur, and Sherlock is watching them from the dungeon. But once they come across the spiders, they realize it was not going to be as easy as other games. Arthur jumps on a spider and stabs it but is wounded in the action. More spiders come to aid their injured comrade, and the 5 goblins are defeated and killed easily. The spiders did not even leave their body, and the players had to respawn by entering the login room again. But even though they died, the goblins are very eager to tell their companions about the spiders. The spiders were huge and looked too real. A lot of attention had been given to detail, and it showed. The goblins are thrilled that the battle events in the game were so difficult, and that would mean high rewards too. Sherlock is amused watching the goblins and goes back to the spider's nest to collect the equipment. But as he is collecting them, he finds that his goblin party has killed one spider monster before they were wiped out. And there is something strange inside the body of the spider. Sherlock suspects it could be a magic item and teleports the body back to the dungeon. The goblins are amazed by the teleportation spells, and Arthur and others realize that it was the same spider they killed. Sherlock appoints Arthur and Yumikawa, who are both members of the assault party, as assistants to Simba for finding out the magic item inside the spider's belly. And it turns out to be a green orb which appears quite valuable. Sherlock decides to reward Arthur and Yumikawa by granting them a level 1 reputation in the dungeon. He takes them to the city, Winterfell, with him using a teleport scroll. The goblins are impressed by the teleportation skills and are ready to wail out if they could buy skills like that using real money. Once inside Winterfell, the 2 goblins are shocked at the city while they follow around their lord. They wonder why so much depth and detail was added to the city if it was not launched as a part of the game yet. But Sherlock doesn't allow them to wander off, and they can only see things nearby. They take screenshots of everything they see, and Yumikawa is excited to compile it all in his blogs. Sherlock decides to go to a magic item store to appraise the green orb he found in the spider's belly. An old goblin is minding the shop and he welcomes him. The 2 goblins are trying to check out everything, but they cannot see the panel with information. Arthur keeps telling Yumikawa that he feels so constrained by the lack of a purchasing system. If there was one, he would buy everything. The goblin shopkeeper is annoyed by their antics and tells Sherlock that his servants did not have proper manners. But Sherlock shows him the green orb and asks to appraise it. He looks at the orb and licks it to appraise it, and Sherlock decides it was not wise to tell him that thing came out of a spider's belly. The goblin shopkeeper says that it was the key to a magic ruin and was very valuable. He asks him to sell it to their shop for 5,000 magic stones, but Sherlock finds the cost too low. He pitches his final offer, 6,000 magic stones and a fairy that they had captured. The fairy was skilled in alchemy and gardening and could make high-level potions from simple ingredients. Sherlock thinks that the offer was a good one and takes it. He goes to a florist and asks him to sell him pots, soil, and seeds to grow a herb garden. The florist tells him that it would cost 1,000 magic stones, but Sherlock has more than enough money right now. He teleports back to the dungeon with the two goblins, the caged fairy and stone golems from the florist shop who would help set up the greenhouse. The other goblins are really excited that even more new content was coming out. Arthur and Yumikawa are now the most reputed goblins in the dungeon as they got to visit the city with the Demon Lord and participated in 2 hidden events. Arthur is a big spender in games and keeps on saying that he wanted the game to develop a purchasing system as soon as possible. But as they return, the fairy faints. She had been uncooperative with the store and had not eaten food when they offered her to eat. Blue tasks the goblins to take care of the fairy and they think that she was another NPC in the game. They ask the fairy if she needed anything when she wakes up, but she fears the demons surrounding her. Sherlock approaches her and tells her that he would let her go home to the surface if she worked hard and earned 50,000 magic stones for the dungeon using her skills. But the fairy tells him that she would not sell her soul to a demon and would prefer dying. Sherlock leaves her alone, and as he goes away, Blue asks him why wasn't he torturing the fairy to obey him. Sherlock says that the demons were not cruel anymore. They did not torture other creatures to obey them. With that, the goblins are concerned about the nature of the next quest. If the fairy did not cooperate with their demon lord, it was unto them to convince her. But then they call it a day and Sherlock decides to check out the reaction of the people about the new content in the game. He opens the official website and comes across another video by the Yumikawa. This time, he explained everything about the new content in the game. He says that the game had some unknown method of updating the content without server maintenance, and it was cool. The battle at the spider's nest was tough, but it triggered 2 hidden quests. And even though the players are willing to spend a lot of money, the game does not support it yet and expects them to develop through manual training. And he felt stronger in the real world due to the training he did in the game. He explains that how he and Arthur played a key role in defeating the spider with the other goblins and then got to visit Winterfell with the Demon Lord. He is pretty sure that Winterfell would be unlocked for the players in the next content release, and everyone had a good reason to be excited about it as it was like a real city. He also talks about the newly brought fairy, who seemed to be at odds with the Demon Lord. But that was probably a part of their quest, and he was excited to play the game tomorrow. Sherlock is impressed by the diligence of the goblin and asks Blue why was he putting in so much effort. Blue tells him that it was one of the many things players did. They like to make strategies and tell other players about them. The goblins have already earned enough money to buy more equipment and gather a larger team to clear the spider's nest. And Sherlock is excited to see how far can they take his dungeon. With that, this video ends. In the last video, we saw Sherlock, a young high-ranking demon, start his journey of becoming a demon lord. For this purpose, he buys the cheapest dungeon he can find but runs into something unexpected when he is trying to activate the dungeon core. The dungeon core starts talking to him and tells that his name was Blue. Sherlock thinks that the succubus saleswoman sold him a defective core, but Blue pleads with him to not return him. In return, he would tell Sherlock a way to hire goblins for his dungeon that would work for free, and with more enthusiasm than other goblins. Those goblins would be people from the other world, and for them this dungeon would be like a game. Sherlock is tempted by the offer and follows the instructions of Blue and invites 100 goblins from the other world, not knowing that they were humans from Earth. The people of Earth see a notification for the first test for the first virtual reality game in the world, Eternal Kingdom, and rush to register themselves. Out of these, Sherlock selects 100 candidates and they come into his dungeon. He is the master of the dungeon city, and all the goblins feel strangely intimidated and loyal to him. These otherworldly goblins are very strange, and Blue keeps on explaining to Sherlock the reasons behind their behavior and how to keep them satisfied and motivated. Some of the goblins soon become leading figure among the 100 players. A rich boy whose character name is Arthur, and a vlogger whose name is Yumikawa are the 2 most prominent players. Sherlock also hires a blacksmith named Simba to help create weapons and other items in his dungeon. He keeps on updating the content of his dungeon to keep his goblins motivated. The most important of the updates is the spider hunt, which is too hard for the goblins to complete. While selling some loot obtained from the spider's body, Sherlock buys a fairy as a slave, but she is uncooperative. As more and more features are added by Sherlock into his dungeon, the response of people who want to join the beta testing also grow more favorable, and he thinks that he is on track to become the owner of the best dungeon in the entire underworld. The goblins are making a lot of progress, and now they are confident that they can take on the giant spiders this time. They form a raid party and go rushing to the hunting grounds, and Sherlock is seeing them using his surveillance system. He does not think that his goblins could do anything special right now. He asks Blue that was he sure goblins found hurting themselves by fighting monsters entertaining. Blue tells him that of course not, the goblins did not like pain, but this was a game. But Sherlock is still not convinced and asks if the goblins did not have wars in their world. They were really lousy in fighting. Blue replies that the goblins' world had war, but these people never participated in it. They were not in danger usually and had no experience of battles. But Blue is also concerned that if the players kept on dying without making progress, they might rage quit. It was a new term for Sherlock, who asks Blue what he meant by the term. Blue explains that it meant when people could not make no progress or feel no fun in a game and therefore decided to leave it. Sherlock also thinks that this was a serious issue. He had just recruited these goblins, and if they quit, it would be a huge blow to his dungeon. Blue tells Lord Sherlock that they should take measures to ensure that the goblins continued to work hard. Sherlock asks Blue if he had any suggestions, and Blue asks him to give them means to grow stronger. If that happened, the repeated deaths would only encourage them to work harder. Sherlock thinks that will be a good idea. Even if the goblins didn't rage quit, he would have a shortage of material for their weapons if they kept dying and losing their weapons. Sherlock takes out a teleportation scroll and tells Blue to console the goblins once they returned. He was going to the city of Winterfell to scout some skill trainer for them. Sherlock activates the teleportation spell, and Blue has still not understood the assignment completely. He thinks that he must give some sort of reward and information to the players to console them. He issues a system message to all the goblins. All the goblin warriors who went to subjugate the spiders will receive 10 copper coins. New skill trainers will be available soon, and goblins can learn skills from them. In Winterfell, a beautiful succubus woman is shocked on hearing Sherlock's request for a battle trainer. She greets him with a charming smile, saying long time no see. She asks him how much could he pay to hire a trainer, and Sherlock replies 20 magic stones. The woman is also embarrassed on learning that Sherlock could afford only so little, and tells him that it might be tough to find someone willing to work for that money. Sherlock tells her that he was not asking for a warrior trainer. He just needed someone to train the goblins in his dungeons. And since his dungeon was new, he could not give a salary of more than 20 magic stones. The succubus understands his reasons, but tells him that they do not publish employment notices for jobs under 200 magic stones. Sherlock does not hesitate to flirt with the beautiful woman and asks her if their relationship does not compel her to help him. She replies that they have only met twice, but Sherlock tells her that the first time they met, she sold him a half-broken dungeon core. And he thinks that his request is justified in this case, and he was not asking for too much. The succubus saleswoman thinks for a while and decides to reach a negotiation. She would look out for anyone willing to take the job Sherlock was offering. If she found anyone suitable, she would contact him. Sherlock is glad on hearing this and says that he will need the trainer as soon as she could manage. As they are returning, Blue tells Sherlock that on seeing the sales lady, he thought of something. Sherlock needed an assistant, and that would save him a lot of time. But Sherlock replies that to keep an assistant would mean more costs, and he could not afford it right now. Blue tries to convince him and says that he could hire part-timers, or he could try asking the saleswoman, as she was quite friendly with him. But Sherlock says that Blue should ask on his behalf then. He returns, and the goblins surround him and start asking about the new skill system. They ask him when could they learn the skills, and were there any conditions, and were they going to need to pay for that. Sherlock asks Blue if he informed the goblins about the skills. Blue replies that he indeed posted a message, but the goblins were misunderstanding it. Sherlock decides to clear their doubts and tells them that he had hired a skill trainer to increase their combat abilities and make them into good soldiers. The goblins are excited for the new features and start asking if they could wail now. Sherlock goes to the core lobby to release an official notice when he hears something. He turns back to see that Blue was glowing red, and then a letter pops out of him. Sherlock catches the letter. It reads that a trainer had been found, and the sales lady Evelyn was asking her third-party fee of 5 magic stones. Blue is impressed by how meticulous Evelyn was and once again asks Sherlock to make her his assistant. Blue then tells Sherlock that a teleportation request from the saleswoman was coming, and Sherlock orders him to accept it. From the teleportation gate, a troll walks out, and he is crying, saying that there were many goblins in this dungeon. That meant the Lord was rich and there was still hope for him. The troll who came out of the teleportation portal has his head and hands covered in bandages. Yumikawa, a leading player, recognizes him as the gate guard of Winterfell. The goblins are excited on seeing that a new NPC with Winterfell connections was here, and they hope that he would give them some quests. Then Sherlock approaches the troll, who bows down before him and introduces himself as Moros, the elite guard captain. He says that he was willing to train the Lord's brave, and before saying anything else, he looks around and says goblins with a surprised look. The goblins think that he was really going to be their skill teacher, and they could start learning skills now. But Sherlock has also identified the troll as a guard from the city teleportation lobby. Moros says that Lord Sherlock could trust him to do the job. He even shows his medallion that proved how capable he was. Sherlock has no interest in his story and asks him to train the goblins to fight spiders. And Moros is willing to serve Sherlock. They finalize their contract by using a spell called Put It on Paper. Sherlock asks Moros to follow him so that he could tell him the things he need to do his job. Sherlock says that his dungeon is quite special and he cannot let goblins train for too long. The goblins were going to get 2 hours of free training every day and they will have to pay for anything after that. And the payment would be made in copper coins rather than magic stones. Moros would be given ample rest too. Sherlock asks the troll if he accepted the conditions. Moros says yes, but then he asks why would the Lord accept useless currency like coins. And he adds that goblins were not really fit to be warriors. Their response to battle was dodging and running away, and making training paid would discourage them even more. But Sherlock tries to calm down Moros by saying that this was the system in his dungeon city. Moros would understand everything as soon as he starts training the goblins. Sherlock gives the troll a badge saying to start his job right away, and that the first day was free for all the goblins. Moros understands the orders and sets out to fulfill his duty. He reaches the training ground and finds that the goblins were already assembled and eager to train. Moros had thought that he might need to make an example of someone to motivate them using fear, but it was the opposite. He then greets the goblins. He tells them that his name was Moros and he was in charge of their training from today. The goblins would get 2 hours of free training every day and must pay after that. And the goblins reply in unison that they understood. The training starts under the tutelage of Moros. Sherlock is walking around the dungeon when he asks Blue that he said goblins like to fight. Then why was the goblin named Raintia picking herbs and not going to train? Blue thinks that the player was enjoyed peaceful life and sightseeing, a pacifist. Sherlock does not understand what was there to see here for the goblins. But he does not care. Such pacifist goblins could learn herb medicine from the fairy. But Sherlock thinks that anyway, his dungeon was finally on the right track of development, and he was getting closer to his goal. In the training grounds, Moros shouts that he wants to test the strength of the goblins before starting their training. He invites them to challenge him and the goblins start looking at each other. But Arthur steps forward and declares that he will be the first one to challenge Moros. Moros accepts the challenge and the battle begins. But Arthur is knocked out almost immediately. And instead of being discouraged by it, the goblins are even more excited to check their strength against the strong NPC. They all attack Moros together, but he confidently stands waiting for them to come close. A sound of clashes is heard and soon all the goblins are on the ground. Moros says that the goblins did not even know how to slash, they were his worst trainees. But the goblins admit that they were just beginners and this was their first combat training. They had never slashed at people before, but they had slashed spiders. Moros finds this interesting and learns that the goblins were annihilated every time they challenged the spiders. Moros says that they were just providing food to the spiders and decides to give them some real combat experience. And for that he wants to take them to capture spiders. He goes to the core lobby to report this idea to Lord Sherlock, who allows it and asks Moros to take safety measures. Moros says that the Lord could rest his worries. He would not let his servants die so easily. But what Sherlock really meant was for Moros to protect himself. If there was a danger, he could abandon other goblins and escape with his own life. Moros is deeply touched that the dungeon lord cared about his life. He promises to show Sherlock his efficiency and leaves. In the training grounds, he tells the goblins his plan to capture spiders for their training and asks if there were any volunteers. He is thinking that goblins are cowards and there was no way they would willingly come. But there is a rush of volunteers that shocks Moros. He thinks why were they not afraid of death? He selects 10 of them and says that the remaining goblins could come with him the next time. And the goblins stare at him with great expectation. Yumikawa tells Moros that if he was in danger, he should just run away. Moros is surprised by why the goblin was so insistent on letting him get harmed. The quest is released officially. The goblin party is going to capture spiders under the command of their coach Moros. The reward for this quest would be 100 copper coins and free equipment for all the participants, as well as 500 reputation points. But if Moros died during the quest, it would immediately end. So it was vital that he survived even if all the goblins died. Inside the spider caves, the goblins have entered a formation with their trainer in the center. They are saying that if they encounter danger, they will run away with their coach. But Moros is getting annoyed by them and shouts that if they don't want to fight, they should run away. And he couldn't fight while they surrounded him from all sides. The goblins are impressed that the NPC's character was quite impressive, and he could initiate a dialogue from himself. but they are concerned that Moros may cancel the quest if he hears them. But Arthur, who is at the front of the squad, notifies them that something was coming. It was the giant spiders, 2 of them. Moros takes the lead and commands the goblins to kill one first and distract the other one during that time. He rushes ahead and the goblins follow his command. Moros jumps high in the air and slashes the head of the spider. The spider is injured by his attack and hisses his anger. Moros decides to finish the spider and says that it would be its honor to die by his sword. But before he can deliver the final blow, he hears someone shouting from back to be careful. Yumikawa comes running from behind and pushes Moros away from harm's path, but he gets stabbed by the arm of the spider instead. The spider's arm pierces across his chest. Moros uses this opening and slashes the belly of the spider. He then commands Arthur to draw the spider's attention while the other goblins to surround it. They surround the spider and start dealing blows from all sides. They are really pumped up and manage to kill the spider. They are happy that this was the first spider they killed without facing any serious loss. Moros is confused on seeing Yumikawa was still alive even after being stabbed fatally. He wonders why were the goblins going to such lengths to save him when they had just met. Yumikawa was trying to saw away the spider's leg that had stabbed him. Moros asks him if he was still able to move, but then he is impressed by Yumikawa's resilience. He was still trying to cut the spider leg to free himself. He is touched and thinks that such a brave warrior should not die a painful and slow death. He approaches Yumikawa and says that he did not know why he saved him, but he would remember him. Moros places his sword on Yumikawa's neck and the latter is confused about what the NPC was doing. But Moros was just showing his kindness as a warrior. He says that he was going to give the goblin warrior a quick and painless death to end his suffering. But Yumikawa says that he can still live and calls Arthur and another goblin called Cheshire for help. Moros backs off after learning the goblin's determination and Yumikawa tells his friends that the NPC just tried to kill him. As Arthur cuts off the spider leg to free him, Cheshire tells Yumikawa that maybe the NPC thought he was suffering and wanted to help according to its program. But as Yumikawa gets up, Moros is shocked that he does not seem to be in pain at all. They start walking back to the dungeon and Yumikawa says that they should hurry so that Lord Sherlock could heal him. Moros is speechless and impressed by the determination of the goblin. And the other goblins are showering praises on the brave warrior too. They say that he was amazing to go and block the attack even before anyone realized. The quest was completed thanks to his actions. Moros is taken back as he expected them to praise his skills as well. But then he commands the goblins to stop chattering and to carry back the spider corpse back to the dungeon training ground. But soon after reaching the dungeon, Arthur declares that Yumikawa is dead. Moros feels sad and asks the other goblins to join him in the mourning. But the goblins seem not to be concerned at all. They tell their coach to stop mourning uselessly. The dungeon city was just up ahead. And as the spider corpse is brought back to the dungeon, all the goblins cheer in excitement that history has been created. Arthur brings Yumikawa to Sherlock and requests him to bring him back to life. Moros is also about to explain the situation to him, but Sherlock just smiles and uses a magic. Yumikawa, whose dead body was lying on the ground with a hole in his chest, revives and stands up to declare that he is back. But while the other goblins seem pretty chill about it, Moros is shocked beyond belief. He screams that a dead goblin came back to life. He asks the dungeon lord about this, but before he can complete his question, Sherlock replies that it was exactly what he thought. Sherlock sits on his throne and says that he can revive his servants. No matter what became of them, he had a method to summon them back again. He smirks and says that the greater demons like him were the real wielders of magic. Moros looks at Sherlock with excitement and respect and says that it was an insane ability. But Sherlock explains to him that he did not meet the requirements to be summoned and thus cannot be revived like the goblins. He says his dungeon was quite unique and only warriors with great adaptability could join him. And if this was too weird for Moros, he could leave. Moros is trembling in excitement and kneels before Sherlock saying that he wants to form a soul contract to serve the Lord for his life. The soul contract was a high-level contract using which someone could become the willing servant of a lord. But it was quite difficult to end the contract. But Sherlock does not like the idea of soul contract. It was old-fashioned. New Age demons like him charmed people instead. He lifts up Moros and tells him that he had no need to go that far as he had a family to look out for. But if he wanted to serve, Sherlock would consider letting his family also move into the dungeon once they expanded to a certain level. Then Sherlock tells him to go to work with the energy he had right now. But Moros feels extremely gratified by his words and with tears in his eyes says that he will show his loyalty to the Lord. and then he will get the same treatment as the goblins. With that, he walks off with determination. Blue asks Sherlock if he hid the fact about goblins being otherworlders to preserve Moroz's loyalty, but Sherlock says that he just wanted to keep his secret protected. Then he asks Blue that if other dungeon lords came to know that he had a special dungeon core, what would they do? Blue says that of course, they would start a war. Sherlock also thinks the same, and that is why he wants to strengthen his defenses. He asks Blue that how many more otherworlders can they recruit. Blue tells him that the current limit was the 100 goblins, and if he wanted more players than that, he would have to upgrade Blue's system. Blue explains the process to recruit more players and calls it beta testing. They would have to release an official announcement about new jobs and terrains to attract more otherworlders. And Sherlock feels that this was going to be really heavy on his pocket, and his excitement dies right away. He decides to forget expanding right now and start only after getting some more magic stones. He then starts watching over the goblins from the core lobby and sees that they were working hard in their training and mining. Sherlock thinks that this was nice enough that his goblins were hard-working and motivated in other jobs as well. Yumikawa goes to Simba's workshop and asks him if their new equipment were ready yet, but Simba does not reply. Yumikawa thinks that this NPC could even filter information. But Simba is one to get irritated easily, and he still does not know what the goblins meant when they call him NPC. But he does not like it. But he turns back and tells Yumikawa that when it will be finished, he would bring it out at the market. But Yumikawa knows exactly how to get on the blacksmith's nerves. He yells that Simba should make it sharp and runs away with Simba chasing angrily after him. Sherlock tells Blue to give the new equipment some labels too, and Simba has already done that. The new equipment is Steel Shield of common grade. And after that, the goblins start on their spider hunting mission. Yumikawa calls for the goblins with a full set of equipment and good training with Moros to come join his party. And many goblins volunteer to join his team, stating about what roles they could fulfill. Sherlock looks at their excitement and asks Blue if this raid could really succeed. And Blue is optimistic that they can succeed. They have been trained and have good equipment. But then Sherlock's attention goes to some loud sound coming from behind him. A mining goblin seems to have found something new. Other goblins also surround him to ask what was it that he discovered, but none of them know what it was. The goblin who discovered the new mineral says that his pickaxe broke in just 2 strikes. That meant the mineral was quite valuable. As the goblins are discussing what it was, Sherlock also arrives at the location. The goblin is excited to show the Lord what he had discovered, and Sherlock orders them to call Simba so that he could appraise it. Then he orders the goblins to leave to their job, and they seem disappointed that there was no reward or announcement. Later, Simba appraises the new mineral and says that it was gold. The purity was not high, but it was still good enough to make magic equipment. Sherlock wants to know if it can be sold, and Simba tells him that if it was more pure, it could fetch a good price. But things also depend heavily on market demand and supply. Sherlock is thinking about the prospects of finding gold and asks Simba if he can create some tools to mine it. Simba says that he will ask the store about it, and Sherlock says that he will need 10 of them. He also wants Simba to ask if gold can be used to pay for the equipment instead of magic stones. Simba uses a magic letter, he burns it, and the message reaches the store. But then both Sherlock and Simba are surprised when they see that the goblins are ready to go on a hunting mission with Yumikawa as their leader. As they enter the portal to spider territory, Simba voices his anger. He says that the goblins were inconsiderate and thought he had no feelings. They wake him up in the middle of the night to smith make weapons for their raids, and he could not live peacefully like that. Sherlock understands Simba's worries and suggests a way. On the other side, even Moros goes through the same thing. The goblins also pestered him while he was sleeping, and he agrees with Simba. So Sherlock asks Blue to give the goblins a task to build dormitories for the 2 NPCs, and Blue releases a quest notification for the same. But some shameless goblins are still not giving up, and they plan to sneak into the rooms to see if any equipment could be found there. Inside the spider caves, the goblins are waiting for the spiders to come. They do not have to wait for long, as some spiders come at them and the battle begins. The goblins follow a strategy of dealing hits and then retreating to a safe distance. Using this strategy, they corner and surround one spider and kill it like Moros had taught them. The first group hunts down the spider they were facing and then move on to help the others. But one of the spiders runs away. But Yumikawa lifts up his teammates' morale by saying that they killed 3 without suffering any losses, and that was decisive victory. Then the goblins pack up the spiders and cannot wait to show them to their lord. But Sherlock is already seeing them, and he is impressed by their performance. Blue says that Moros' training was quite effective. But then Blue starts glowing red again. Another message has come for the dungeon lord. Sherlock guesses that it was probably the response from the store Simba wrote to. The 10 pickaxes were going to be delivered by some merchants who would need 500 magic stones in exchange. But they were also willing to help him develop the gold mines. Sherlock is pleased by this response, but then he thinks of something troublesome. The goblins were sure to go and meet the traders, given how their personality was, and the goods that Sherlock was buying. He was using magic stones for them. The goblins would be curious about the new currency item that was kept a secret from them, and Sherlock feels that it will be a bother to explain all that. And the traders could also feel weird if the goblins said anything unnecessary, leading to their secrets being discovered. But Blue suggests that he can incorporate this into a playable event for the game. They could get the goblins to exchange some goods with the traders, and the exchanged goods would be their reward. Sherlock thinks that this would be better for him, but he would need to talk with the traders beforehand so that the conditions could be favorable to both. But Sherlock decides to talk with the traders when they arrive. First, he should go and greet the victorious goblins. The goblins are trying to take the parts of the spiders that are valuable. One of them had heard from Simba that spider carcasses can be used to improve weapons, and now everyone is excited to upgrade. But they are also disappointed that there is no drop this time, and neither did they find the rare spider webs, which are the most valuable. But they could get some money and reputation for the spider legs and meats. Sherlock is happy that his goblins are working even harder because of the rewards. But then Yumikawa is holding a spider leg and begins shouting. He says spider legs, auction for 20 coins each, and the goblins jump into the bidding war. But everyone is left disappointed when the rich kid Arthur joins in and tells Yumikawa to sell everything to him for real money. The other players think that this was peak whaling and they can't match it. They are demotivated and start dispersing to work in the dormitory construction for some coins. The spider legs were too costly for them right now, but one of the goblins says that high prices and the value of the currency would both fall when the game enters beta testing. And the disappointed goblins think that it would be better to just quit the game instead of waiting for the beta. Sherlock is confused about what they were doing, and Blue tells him that the goblins were trading. Sherlock initially wanted to take the loot and reward the goblins with coin, and then he wanted to craft better gear and sell them to the goblins. But since Simba revealed the secret, the goblins were going crazy and were trying to get the weapons made themselves. Blue advises Sherlock that as long as they set the right prices, they could still earn a lot from this scenario, and they could create many upgrade levels to maximize their profit. Levels is another new term for Sherlock, and Blue explains that with each upgrade, the stats of the gear would rise up. They would decide the cost and materials required, and the success rate of the upgrades would decrease as the levels go up. That meant some upgrades could fail and the goblins would have to buy more materials. They would sell the upgrade scrolls to the goblins for coins, and there were other ways to get more money from the goblins as well. And this way, the economy based on recycling the coins would bloom. Sherlock and Blue are both excited to bring along this new feature. As Arthur is walking towards Simba's shop, he notices the blacksmith putting up a notice. It reads that the upgrade function has been enabled, and spider webs and legs were needed to upgrade a weapon. A weapon could be upgraded only 5 times, but after the first 3, there was a risk of failure. Arthur is excited and he calls other goblins to come and see the new upgrade feature that had been launched. Some of the goblins do not like the news and that there was chance of self-destruction of weapons and upgradation. But others think that it was a good thing and the failure chances only appeared after 3 upgrades. And the first player to try the feature is Arthur. He goes to Simba and says that he wants to upgrade his weapon, and Simba tells him to follow him. Other goblins also follow them to see how it was done. As Simba is preparing to upgrade the sword, the goblins watch nervously. He then throws the heated sword into a liquid and blue flames erupt from the liquid. The goblins are amazed and think that this was a special effect. But a goblin falls as a result of the excited crowd's stampede. As he picks himself up, his hand touches a piece of paper. But as he reads the contents of the paper, his eyes sparkle. He had found some breaking news that was going to go viral as soon as he vlogged about it. As Simba is working on the upgrade, some goblins think that this was not going to go well. But the blacksmith is about to finish, and he then presents the finished sword to Arthur. But as soon as Arthur checks the stats of the weapon, he finds that it was nothing different. Only the attack power had gone up by 1. Arthur is disappointed and the other goblins ask him if there was anything special. But he decides to go to Moro's to test out his new weapon before forming a final opinion. Just as he leaves, Yumikawa comes to upgrade his weapon. But he has the habit of irritating Simba on purpose and starts making unreasonable demand. He asks Simba if he could give an elemental attribute to the sword, or could he make it thinner. He starts pestering the blacksmith, who gets angry and kicks him out of his workshop. But the sword upgrade is complete and goblins surround Yumikawa and ask him to let them see it too. He hands them the new sword to see and the goblins can't find any difference. But the money has been spent already and Yumikawa can't do anything about that now. But Sherlock is seeing the goblins try the new upgraded weapons from his room. He does not realize that the goblins are not satisfied with the new feature and thinks that they like it. But then Blue tells him to update the data on their official website. Sherlock asks him what did he mean by that, and then we see the screens showing information about Moros, the isolated dorms, diamond shield, spider silk and legs, and the weapon upgrade. Blue says that this was the new and updated version of the game and the players were sure to like it. And another feature was soon going to be introduced. That would be the mysterious merchants. Sherlock starts inputting the data in the official webpage of the game Eternal Kingdom as the 0.01 version. The post gets great response from the Otherworlders and they can't wait for the official release. Sherlock is scrolling through the comments and says that the Otherworlders like their game. It was all thanks to Blue. But then Sherlock stops scrolling as he sees something shocking. He tells Blue that one of their secrets got leaked. On the screen, he sees a beta tester have leaked some important secret information he found out in the dungeon city. With that, this video ends.